Today, we are going to build a high-powered gaming PC that's invisible to the untrained eye. I also want to build it in such a way that it integrates seamlessly with my home theater setup, much like a game console would. I'm talking Wake with a controller, an interface that doesn't require a keyboard and mouse, and overall, just an experience that's conducive to couch gaming. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, let's talk about packaging. PCs are generally big and bulky with bright rainbow LEDs that make them the center of attention in any room, which is the exact opposite of what I want in my living room setup. So instead, we're going to hide this PC in something that would look appropriate in any living room. And it also just so happens to be from the sponsor of today's video, Trio. They sent over their Tower Fan 519S, and this thing is seriously impressive. It's whisper quiet, it features a brushless DC motor, it's got smart controls for easy operations, and I'll show you even more of the cool things that it can do later. But first, I think you can probably see where I'm going here. A fan like this is the perfect place to hide a PC because we can utilize the fact that it's already moving a ton of air to cool our system and enhance performance. But in order to pull this off, we are going to have to do a lot of engineering and a lot of custom build. So let's get started. I searched far and wide for the perfect hardware for this project, and what I ended up finding, I think, is pretty unique. And okay, well, oh man. All right, so this is quite a bit larger than it looked in any of the photos, but hopefully that's okay and we can find a way to slim it down as we go. Well, anyways, this is the Adaman G7 Ti. And what we have here is basically a bunch of laptop hardware repackaged in a mini PC form factor. Well, kind of mini, which is fantastic for our application because we're getting some seriously high-end specs in the most compact and power-efficient form factor possible. And when you consider that the Tower Fan 519S moves nearly 1400 CFM, I think we are going to be able to keep this thing nice and cool, which should provide us with some really fun options later. Under the hood, we have a 24-core Intel CPU, an RTX 4070 with support for DLSS, which is going to be really handy later when we connect this thing to my big 4K TV. And then this system is sold as a bare bones kit, so I added 3 terabytes of NVMe storage and 32 gigabytes of DDR5 RAM. So all in, we have some pretty enviable specs. This thing should easily mop the floor with a PS5 Pro. But I said we were going to make this thing invisible to the untrained eye, and as it stands, it's still way too big. So let's talk about how we're going to fix those issues. First, upon closer inspection, I realized that a lot of space inside the case is taken up by these daughter boards along the front edge. Truth be told, for a couch gaming setup, I don't really need the additional USB ports and headphone jack. So by simply removing them, I can shrink the footprint of this system pretty significantly. That being said, I'll still need to find a place for this one particular board because it has the power switch on it, but we'll worry about that later. With everything stripped down to just the factory motherboard and cooling system, things were starting to look a bit more manageable. And now we can start to think about how we're going to package the system. I started by making a very accurate and fairly detailed 3D model of all the parts. I know this seems like a lot of upfront work, but it only took me a few hours and it's going to save way more than that later in the design phase. Here, I'm paying special attention to all the mounting points, the I/O ports, and of course the cooling system. The precise location of all this is going to be extremely important later when, spoiler alert, we build an entirely new enclosure for the system. But I'm getting ahead of myself because before we go any further, I need to check all of my measurements. And the way I do that is by printing out a really simple motherboard tray that has mounting points for all of our components. By screwing everything to it, I can confirm that my digital stand-ins are true to their real-life counterparts. Okay, so that is actually looking pretty good. All of our screw holes line up, our ports have good clearance, and overall, I'm feeling pretty confident about all of my measurements. So now, what do you say we turn our attention to the Tower Fan 519S and start thinking about how exactly we're gonna mount that thing. And in order to pull this off, I need to understand how the fan operates. Contained in the lower half of the tower is a single integrated brushless DC motor. This is great for power efficiency, reliability, and it also allows the fan to operate at a whisper quiet 25 decibels, which makes it perfect for use in my home theater. That motor spins a central fan that intakes air from the rear and then pushes it out the front. And at the highest power settings, it generates an insane wind speed of 28 feet per second. So in order for this fan to pull double duty and cool both me and our computer, we need to position it somewhere in that stream of air. At first, I thought about hiding it in the base of the fan and then ducting some of the intake stream through the base, but when I pressed this button on the remote, I immediately realized that that was probably not going to work. This fan oscillates. It's got a full 90-degree range of motion, which is great from a fan perspective. It even has multiple wind modes to suit different needs and environments, but it means our PC will need to be able to rotate with the fan. So I was staring at it, trying to figure out how I was going to do this, when I realized that the solution was right under my nose. Drio made this rear grille that just pops right off. Now they did this to make the whole fan super easy to clean and maintain, but I'm looking at it and all I can see is the perfect place to mount our PC. So with that, I set about adding the Tower Fan 519S to my 3D model. And here, I was actually kind of nervous. I've never modeled anything this large before, but it turns out that it's actually kind of easier to model big things as opposed to small things. Who would have thought, right? I did need to pay special attention to the rear grille though, as all of these holes need to be modeled extremely accurately in order for my plan to work. I wanted to create a modular scaffolding that I could then attach more parts to later. But first, I needed to double check my work. So just like with my motherboard tray from earlier, I printed this really simple part that's only function was confirming all of my measurements. Oh, it's on there real good. Oh. And based on the fact that it slotted right into position with a satisfying click, I knew I was on the right track. From there, that single part evolved into 4 separate braces that will then get screwed to the rear grille of the fan. These braces will become the backbone of this project. And I did consider making them all as a single part, but by breaking them up, they were a lot easier and faster to print. And also, making them more modularly like this, for lack of a better term, allows for faster redesigns and reprints if something doesn't work out, which is really likely during this early prototyping phase. Thankfully, the braces screwed in place on the rear grille without much issue, and I was ready to move on to the next piece of the puzzle. Well, actually, it's a piece you saw earlier, but new and improved. I took that motherboard tray, beefed it up, removed some cutouts to improve airflow, and importantly, added some mounting holes so that I could screw it to our new braces. And this was yet another test of all my measurements. If my braces weren't positioned correctly or didn't sit exactly where I thought they would, none of the screws would line up. But it all fit together really nicely. And this is why I invested all that time early on. If you can get good, accurate measurements of your physical parts, all of your 3D printed parts that reference them should fall into place nicely. Obviously, we still have a lot more to do, but with our motherboard screwed to the tray, we have a very simple and very early prototype of my design. But looking at it, you're probably thinking that that computer is not really in the airstream of the fan. And you're right. So let's fix that. What we need is a snorkel, or put another way, we need a way to duct the air that's being drawn into the fan over all of our heat generating components. You'll see I left a good bit of open space between each of the braces, and my plan is to build a shell on top of them that routes the air how I want. Wrapping my head around exactly how to do that though was a little tricky. I started with really simple geometric shapes and worked my way up from there. In this first draft, I'm not aiming for perfection. I just want to be in the right ballpark. And what I came up with is a few separate pieces. A simple side panel, a rear panel, and then a combination of 2 caps for both the top and bottom. Now, I'll eventually need to incorporate a grille into the front and side panels, but for now, I just wanted to see if this was even close to working. And you know what? To my surprise, it actually kind of was. All the components fit inside the shell, the parts lined up just like they did in the 3D model, well, more or less, and I was ready to move on to the next step. But just like so many things in life, the devil is in the details. And just because I was closing in on the right shape didn't mean I was anywhere near done. What happened next can only be described as a fugue state of 3D modeling, 3D printing, and rapid iteration. At one point, I had all 4 of my 3D printers printing various prototypes of different parts. Sufficient to say this retelling might be slightly out of order, but basically I had 4 main challenges I was trying to overcome. The first was that pesky power switch from earlier. The ribbon cable that connects it isn't very long, so I didn't have a ton of options, but I ended up finding just enough space to squeeze it between the motherboard tray and the front panel. Of course, this required reprinting the motherboard tray with a few design tweaks and also modifying the front panel to include a couple of flexible buttons, but that was all part of the fun. Next was ventilation. I needed to strategically locate a bunch of vents and air intakes in my case so that air would flow in a way that actually cooled the computer. To that end, I added these cutouts directly above the heat pipes and all along the front face of the enclosure. All the air will flow through them and should provide a huge boost to cooling. I even emulated the grill pattern on the Tower Fan 519S to help them blend in. And while I was working on the front panel, I decided to fix that annoying gap from a second ago. I was racking my brain trying to think how I could create an airtight seal between those two panels when I realized that I'm an idiot, and all I needed to do was merge them into one super panel that could be printed as a solid piece. Now, this took over 10 hours to print, but it also made the system feel a whole lot more solid, which was definitely a win. Then I had to consider power. I really wanted this system to be as seamless as possible, and I didn't love the idea of having a big power cable dangling out of its rear. So I took some inspiration from the engineers over at Drio. Earlier, when I had the fan disassembled, I noticed that its power cable was routed up and through the convenient two-piece base. The whole fan actually comes as 3 parts that snap together in no time at all. But that got me thinking, maybe I could do the same thing with the power cable for the computer. I started by designing a third extension piece for the base that would be large enough to hide the computer's PSU, which is thankfully pretty small. Now, of course, because the PSU generates heat, I also needed to add some ventilation to it, and then I was ready to print it out. But here I hit another roadblock. The new base fit the PSU great, but trying to feed the power cable through the fan wasn't working out because of the choke. That's this black cylinder on the power cable that helps to reduce electromagnetic interference. It was just too big to fit through the hole, but I actually found something that fixes that problem and another one. The stock barrel plug protrudes so far out the back of the motherboard that I wouldn't be able to fit my case around it. I did briefly consider bypassing the connector and just soldering the power lines directly to the motherboard, but luckily I found out that you can get extension cables with right angle adapters for these barrel plugs. Of course, I wasn't going to get off that easy. Even the right angle adapter protruded a little too far out the back of the motherboard, so I ended up cutting back its protective plastic, resoldering the wires at a more acute angle, and then re-insulating the whole connector with multiple layers of heat shrink tubing and liquid electrical tape. That actually did the trick though. I was able to route the wire up through the base and connect it to the motherboard. So after yet another slight redesign of the case, this time to accommodate our new internal power connector, I was ready to test and see if it all actually worked. All right, guys, we are in pretty good shape now. But one thing that I haven't talked about yet is materials. As you might have guessed, I don't want this thing to be made out of bright neon colors. This is all just PLA that I have left over from other projects. The nice thing about PLA is that it prints really quickly and really easily, but overall, it isn't that heat resistant or strong. So now that we've got the design down, I'm actually gonna switch over to ASA, which, as you've probably also already guessed, is a lot stronger and more heat resistant. The downside to it though, is that it takes longer to print. So while we wait for that, let's talk about yet another way that we can increase the performance of this computer. Despite a bunch of warning labels implying that this computer used liquid metal or gallium as a thermal interface between the cooler and the CPU and GPU, all I found was regular old thermal paste. So that gave me an opportunity to try out something new. This is PTM7950, and it's a phase-changing thermal interface, which is just a fancy way of saying that this stuff melts when it gets hot, and then it's really good at transferring heat between two surfaces. So I cut some squares of it and adhered them directly to our CPU and GPU. This stuff should perform way better than the stock thermal paste. While I was there, I also replaced all of the stock thermal pads with K5 Pro. This stuff serves much the same function, but you can use it to bridge larger gaps. It does make a horrible mess, but it's way better at conducting heat because you can get it into all sorts of crevices that a normal thermal pad would never reach. So with both of those installed, our cooler should do a much better job of absorbing heat, and when you couple that with the improved airflow from the fan, we should be able to put down some serious performance numbers later when we do our testing. Now, I'd love to pretend that as soon as I finished upgrading the thermal interfaces, all of my parts finished printing. However, the truth is that all of these ASA reprints took well over 24 hours. But that's okay, because we'll just use a little bit of movie magic and pretend like it all happened in the blink of an eye. Putting everything together was basically the same as before, except this time I swapped out all of my silver hardware for black button head screws. That way the whole thing has a blacked out stealth look. At this point, I still had a couple of jobs left to do, but I wanted to relocate the Tower Fan 519S to my living room and see where I could best position it. I settled on the left side of my home theater, as that would allow me to easily route and hide the lone HDMI wire that connects the system to the TV. But here I had a problem. With the fan on the left side, I'd only be cooling half of my home theater. So on the opposite side of the room, I set up Drio's Turbo Poly Fan 508S. This fan is also controlled with Drio's app and provides some much needed cooling for the opposite side of the room. I also really like the way that this fan looks with the RGB ring around the backside. I think that makes it look really smart. So now that we've got both of these fans set up, I'm almost ready to get into the performance testing. But before we do that, I want to make a couple of small tweaks that are going to make this PC behave less like a PC and more like an Xbox or a PlayStation. But in order to do that, we're going to have to get a little crafty. So follow me. If you want the perfect couch gaming setup, you cannot use a Bluetooth controller. Why? Well, because Bluetooth devices can't wake computers from sleep. But you know what can? This 8-bit Do Ultimate 2C controller. It's supposed to have super low latency. It's just a high quality controller in general. And importantly, with its own 2.4 gigahertz USB dongle, it can wake our computer from both sleep and hibernation. And the same is true for most controllers that have their own USB dongles. So all I have to do is press this button right here, and yeah, it turns right on and it's ready for business. Well, kind of. For some reason, Microsoft loves this login screen, and they make you enter a password or a PIN here every time you want to play a game, which sucks because it means that you have to have a keyboard on hand in addition to our aforementioned controller. Now, there is a way to disable this when you're resuming from sleep, but that still means that anytime you fully power down the system and then turn it back on again, you're gonna need a keyboard. So I went in search of a solution, and eventually, after some digging, I found a way to completely disable it. It involves using the run command and launching netplwiz. Then you uncheck this box, enter your login credentials one last time, and boom, you can log into Windows without needing to punch in a password. I'm not sure why this couldn't just be in the normal menus, but hey, here we are. Now, it is worth mentioning that this is a very insecure solution, so if you're following along at home, I suggest setting up your unlocked gaming computer with very limited access to the rest of your network. Okay, so now we're into Windows, but you still need a mouse and keyboard to launch any games, right? Because the controller on the desktop does nothing. So what we need is a controller-friendly front-end launcher. A really popular one is Steam Big Picture Mode. It's free and it's great for launching Steam games. But when it comes to games from other companies, it's kind of a pain in the ass. So I actually found a better solution. This is PlayNight, and it aggregates all of your big game launchers into a single platform. Xbox, EA, Ubisoft, etc., etc. It organizes all of your titles, gets the box art, manages which games are currently installed on your system, and it even has support for emulators and retro games. The best part about it though, is that it completely solves our mouse and keyboard issue, because you can navigate it exclusively with a controller if it's in its full screen mode. In the options, you can configure it to start with Windows, so every time I start this computer, it'll drop me right into the home page and I can pick from any game I want. It's pretty seamless. There's even skins where you can make it look like the PlayStation homepage, but that's a little too on the nose for me. So now let's talk about performance. The best part of this setup is sound. The Tower Fan 519S does such a good job of keeping the computer cool, its own internal fans are barely spinning. And that's a good thing, because they used to be really annoying and really loud. Even at its maximum speed, it's 10 to 15 decibels quieter than the tiny little fans that the computer came with, which is just crazy to think about. And it's moving a lot more air too, because our temperatures have dropped at least 20 degrees across the board. As you'd expect, the drop in temperature is proportional to how fast the Tower Fan 519S is spinning, but even at slower speeds, it's still a huge drop. And that means that no matter how long I choose to game for, I don't ever have to worry about losing performance because something is overheating. I also managed to eke out an overclock on the GPU that boosted performance by about 10%. Now, given our temperatures, I'm sure I could have have done even more here, but modern hardware is so locked down in terms of power delivery that it's just starved for watts at this point. So with all that said, let's talk about gaming. With DLSS and FrameGen enabled, I'm comfortably playing modern AAA games like Assassin's Creed Shadows and the latest Doom with near 100 FPS at 4K. Yes, I am kind of cheating here because I'm using all of NVIDIA's tricks, but a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox would also be using similar technology, so I still think it's a fair comparison. And honestly, for couch gaming, I'm sitting like 10 feet away, so I'm not really doing any pixel peeping, and I just want the smoothest gaming experience possible. And this definitely delivers on that. And I think it also delivers on our original objective of trying to make a stealthy, high-powered gaming PC for my living room. So huge thank you to Drio for making this whole project possible. With both the TowerFan 519S and the Turbo Polyfan 508S keeping me cool, I think I'm gonna have a great time this summer gaming here in my living room. If you want to turn on epic summer fun with Drio, check out the links in the video description, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention, there is an entire separate bonus video that talks about all the things that I would have done differently if I did this project again to make it even better. So that video is currently live for channel members.